Good morning. So, as a deacon in the church, a part of our ministry is to bring the gospel out into the secular world outside of the church. And being so, most deacons have a wife and children and a career in the secular world. So, as some of you know, my career has been in law enforcement. But what most of you probably don't know is exactly what I do in law enforcement. And for most of my career, I have been a bomb technician. Now, if you're conjuring up an image in your head of me sitting down over some type of nuclear warhead, and a timer is counting down and I'm sweating, and I'm going to cut either the red or the blue wire, you're watching way too much television. All right, it is not that dramatic. It's not that exciting, and we're very careful with how we do things. But it's from that experience or that role in my life that I'd like to share a story with you. So it was maybe 10 years ago, and we had received a call from a local police department that responded out to a house. It was a call of a domestic violence incident where a man in the house had taken a rifle and had threatened other members of the family. And so they called the police. The police came to the house. They arrested the man, seized the firearm, and then they had to search the rest of the house to make sure that there were no more weapons in the house. And so the police officers went down into the basement, and in the workshop area, they found what they believed to be a bomb-making operation. And so they called us. So we responded out, and I was the one that got to go downstairs and see what all the commotion was about. And sure enough, I looked on the workbench area and I saw everything that through my training and my education experience told me that this was in fact a bomb-making operation. I was 99% sure that this is what we had. But in order to get to 100%, and secure a conviction of this man who was making the bombs, we have to do a little bit of testing. So we safely removed everything from the house. And two things in particular that we were really careful about when we did that were 2 pill bottles on the bench. Very similar to if you walk into a CVS and you buy a bottle of Advil, and the labels had been removed, and written in marker on the outside was powder. So a few days later, we set everything up at the range and we set up our evidence collection tables, and we took a very small sample of this powder and we conducted a very sophisticated test on it because we went over and we whacked it with a hammer. All right, and sure enough, as we suspected, it went pop. Okay, and then we took another small sample of it and we exposed it to a flame, and sure enough, it sizzled. So from those 2 tests, we knew that the powder had an energetic property to it, that it was pretty much an explosive. But we were still only 99.9% sure of what it was. We had to take another small sample and send it to the laboratory. When it gets to the laboratory, the scientists are the ones that sit down and look at it under the microscope, and they can look at it at the molecular level, and they can tell us exactly what it is. Sulfur, charcoal, whatever the contents of it are, we know exactly now what this mixture is. And now we can hand this over to the prosecutors who are going to take this into court, and they can say with 100% confidence, we know that this is an explosive mixture that was found in the house. Now, I never followed up with this. I don't think we ever went to trial on it. I think there was a plea bargain that was reached, and I think he's been off the streets for quite some time. But testing is something that you and I are engaged with constantly in our lives. And just a few examples, right, is if there's any teachers here or educators, and probably we've all been students at one time or another, we know that testing is a part of learning. Right? The teachers, the educators, the ones who are trying to convey this information to the students want to make sure that it's getting through, and so they're going to give a test. And they'll know, percentage-wise, how that information is being grasped. If we go to the doctor and we're presenting with a few symptoms, the doctor is going to say, okay, based on these symptoms, I'm pretty sure that this is what we have. But we're going to run some tests, right? We're going to run a scan. We're going to give you an x-ray. We're going to take some blood. We're going to examine this so we can know as close to 100% as possible what is going on, so we can figure out how we're going to deal with it. So it's testing. We're dealing with testing every day. And in today's gospel reading, this is what is happening. Jesus is testing this Gentile woman, this Canaanite woman. He's testing her faith. And at first reading, it might be a little off-putting, right? It's a little weird to hear this woman pleading out for help to Jesus, and Jesus ignoring her. Now, I can imagine in my mind that Jesus and his disciples and a crowd are maybe moving down this road, and this woman who's outside of the Jewish faith, outside of the culture, suffering with her daughter's suffering, really embracing some humility and realizing that her only response, or her only option, is to go to this Jewish rabbi, this healer. And she's calling out to him, Lord, help me. And Jesus ignores her. It'd be very easy for her to give up and walk away. We can imagine that she's probably being incessant with her calling out to Jesus, because the disciples even come up to Jesus and say, Lord, please, let's send her away. She's getting annoying. But Jesus replies, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And what he's saying basically to this woman is that you are not in the house of Israel. You are not one of these lost sheep that I was sent for. And it would be very easy for her at this point in the story to say, okay, I tried. But she doesn't stop. She persists in pleading with Jesus and asking for his help. And now it seems like Jesus gets a little bit of a New Jersey attitude to him, because the next thing he says can be coming across as a little offensive to her. Who is going to take the food for the children and feed it to the dogs? Equating the Gentiles with dogs. Now, it would be totally justifiable again for her to take offense at what Jesus said and to walk away offended. But her response is so on point and so full of humility that Jesus is just moved by her faith and her expression of faith. She says, no, Lord, even the dogs will eat the scraps that fall from the master's table. Man, I'm inspired by her. I mean, she is just in there. She's locked in. She is relentless. Her faith is 100%. And Jesus recognizes this and heals her daughter. Great is your faith, woman. That's a great example for us. And when we look at the Bible as a whole, we can see that God is testing humans right from the beginning. It's woven through all the stories of Scripture, going all the way back to Adam and Eve, right? We know they were tested. It didn't go so well, did it? But if we move through the story a little bit more, we come to Abraham, right? God chose Abraham to start this covenant, this new covenant. And he tests Abraham's faith. He says, Abraham, I want you to take your only son, Isaac, bring him up the mountain and offer him as a sacrifice to me. I can only imagine what is going on in Abraham's mind and in his heart as he's saying, God, you can't be serious. My only son. But what does he do? In faith, he brings his son up the mountain, and as he's about to sacrifice his son, God says, stop. I know your faith now. It's 100%. The Egyptians held the Israelites in slavery for quite some time. And Moses was chosen to lead them out of slavery in Egypt, right? We know the story. He parts the Red Sea, leads them out of Egypt and out of bondage. with their destination, the promised land, the land of milk and honey, the land that God had offered to his people from the beginning, and yet they have to pass through the desert. But they don't go right to the promised land. They're made to wander through the desert for 40 years. And at one point, it gets so hard for them in the desert that they're calling out and complaining to Moses. Moses, why did you take us out of slavery? At least in Egypt, we knew where we were going to lay our heads. We knew that we were going to eat. We knew that we were going to work and we could have children. Why did you bring us out here? And Moses doesn't even wind up seeing the promised land. He follows God's will. He follows God's call for him to lead his people. And by the end of that 40 years, their faith had been strengthened and proven before they entered the promised land. You know, last week in our gospel reading, it's really one of my favorites, where Jesus is walking on water. And they're astonished. The disciples are in the boat, right, getting thrashed around by the storm, the wind and the waves rising up. And Peter calls out and says, Lord, if you command it, call me to step out on the water and come to you. And Jesus says, come. And Peter, in faith, steps off the boat into the water, and he must have been astonished because he was standing on the water. But as soon as he took his eyes off of Jesus, and he started getting worried about the wind and the waves splashing up against him, he fell literally like a rock, right? Peter the rock. He fell. Jesus says, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And he pulls him back up. So, brothers and sisters, in our lives, we are going to encounter these tests. We are going to encounter challenges and obstacles. Maybe we go into prayer on a regular basis and we ask God for certain things that are heavy on our hearts. Maybe there's a loved one just like the Canaanite woman who's suffering and we're asking for relief. But just like the Canaanite woman, she didn't get the answer she was seeking right away, did she? She encountered trials, she encountered delays, she encountered a hard situation. But she was relentless right until the end. And when her faith had been proven 100%, her prayers were answered. So when we leave Mass today, let us keep the Canaanite woman in our minds as a great example to be relentless in our faith and trust that our faith will be proven genuine 100%. God bless you.